When people think about the fall of Rome, they imagine barbarians storming the gates, legions collapsing in chaos, or emperors being poisoned in their marble palaces. But empires don't just crumble because of outside attacks, they rot from within. And one of the most corrosive forces behind that decay is always money. Rome didn't just fall because of invasions, corruption, or weak emperors. It fell because its currency collapsed, and the lessons from that collapse still matter today, maybe more than ever. Let's set the stage. For centuries, the backbone of Rome's economy was the silver denarius. First minted around 201 BC, it was almost pure silver, trusted across the empire and beyond. Roman soldiers were paid in it, merchants demanded it, ordinary citizens saved their wealth in it. The denarius wasn't just a coin, it was confidence in metal form. As long as people believed in Rome, they believed in its money. But running an empire isn't cheap. You've got legions to pay, roads to build, aqueducts to maintain, and wars to fund. By the 2nd century AD, Rome was stretched thin, defending its borders against Germanic tribes, fighting the Parthians in the east, and dealing with unrest at home. Taxes couldn't keep up with the cost, so emperors turned to an age-old trick: debasement. Instead of raising taxes, which was always unpopular, they quietly reduced the silver content in the denarius, and the numbers tell the story. Under Emperor Augustus, at the dawn of the empire, the denarius contained about 95% silver. By the time of Caracalla in the early 3rd century, that purity had fallen to around 50%. By the reign of Gallienus in the mid-200s, it had dropped below 5%. A coin once made of solid metal had become little more than bronze coated with a thin silver wash, and the people could see and feel the difference. Inflation followed. Prices soared because the money was no longer anchored to real value. A measure of wheat that once cost a single denarius could suddenly cost dozens. This wasn't some abstract economic theory. It destroyed lives. Soldiers demanded higher pay just to survive. Merchants refused the debased coins, turning instead to barter or gold. Local economies reverted to direct trade because the currency had lost all trust, and the more confidence eroded, the more emperors minted cheaper coins, hoping volume could replace value. It became a vicious cycle, a cycle we've seen repeated in every major inflation since. The crisis peaked during what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. From 235 to 284 AD, Rome suffered nearly 50 years of chaos, invasions, plagues, civil wars, and economic collapse. Emperors rose and fell at dizzying speed, some reigning for mere months before being assassinated. Behind all that political drama was a broken financial system. Taxes were collected in coins that were worth less and less each year. Farmers abandoned their lands rather than pay impossible demands. Trade routes fractured, and the government tried desperate measures, from price controls to forced labor, to keep the system alive. Nothing worked. Then came Emperor Diocletian. In 301 AD, he tried to stop the bleeding by issuing the Edict on Maximum Prices. It set fixed prices for over 1,000 goods and services, from grain to labor wages. Break the law and you face death. But you can't fix worthless money by decree. The edict was a disaster. The black market exploded, official trade collapsed, and people learned a hard truth. A law can't make fake money real. Eventually, Rome abandoned the denarius altogether. Constantine the Great introduced the solidus, a gold coin of consistent purity, around 312 AD. It brought back a bit of stability and lasted for centuries in the Eastern or Byzantine Empire. But by then, the Western Empire was already fatally weakened. The debasement of the denarius had hollowed out Rome's economy from the inside. Armies couldn't be sustained, trade networks were broken, and public trust was gone. The fall of Rome wasn't a single dramatic collapse. It was a long unraveling, and the destruction of its currency was one of the sharpest threads in that unraveling. So what does this mean for us today? It means that the destruction of money is always the destruction of empires. Rome thought it could fool its people by issuing coins that looked the same but held less real value. Modern governments think they can do the same, by printing money, manipulating interest rates, and inflating away debt. But the outcome is always the same. The people pay the price, wealth is destroyed, and trust collapses. Rome's story didn't end in the ancient world. It echoes through history. After World War I, Germany faced crushing reparations under the Treaty of Versailles. The government printed marks to cover its debts, believing it could simply paper over the problem. just as Rome had once struck more coins. By 1923, hyperinflation was raging. A loaf of bread that had cost 1 mark before the war now cost over 200 billion marks. People carried wages home in wheelbarrows. Pensioners watched their life savings vanish overnight. And just like in Rome, those who owed money saw their debts erased, while those who owned real assets, land, factories, foreign currency, emerged even stronger. Money itself had become meaningless. And that economic despair paved the way for extremism and for Hitler's rise. Zimbabwe followed the same path in the early 2000s. After land seizures, collapsing production, and spiraling debts, the government turned to the printing press. By 2008, inflation hit an almost unimaginable rate, nearly 90 sextillion% a year. Prices doubled every day. Stores couldn't change their price tags fast enough. Eventually, Zimbabwe gave up on its own currency entirely, forcing people to use US dollars or South African rand instead. Once again, a government tried to cheat reality. Once again, the people paid the price. But you don't even have to look at those extremes to see the pattern. Even in modern developed economies, Rome's shadow still lingers. Take the United States. In 1971, President Richard Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, cutting the last tie between money and something tangible. From that point on, the dollar became what economists call fiat currency, backed not by gold, but by trust in government. And just like in Rome, the temptation to spend beyond limits became irresistible. Over the next decades, debt ballooned, the money supply exploded, and inflation became a constant background hum. We haven't seen wheelbarrows full of cash, but we have seen a slow erosion of purchasing power. $1 in 1971 buys what takes more than $6 today. The coins look the same, the bills look the same, but their value has been hollowed out. The trick is always the same. Governments disguise inflation as growth. They tell citizens that higher wages mean prosperity, even as costs rise faster. They present debt as investment, even when it just funds consumption. They point to booming stock markets as proof of wealth, even though most people own little or no stock at all. Just like the Roman emperors, they pretend nothing fundamental has changed, while quietly extracting value from every coin, every bill, every paycheck. What makes this more dangerous now is scale. Rome's collapse was imperial. Weimar's hyperinflation was national. Zimbabwe's was local. But today, the entire world runs on fiat money, massive debts, and central banks that print trillions at the first sign of crisis. That means the next collapse won't stop at one empire or country. It'll ripple across the globe. And if history is any guide, the ones who suffer won't be the elites who hold assets, but the millions who depend on salaries, pensions, and savings denominated in fragile currencies. So what should we learn from Rome's currency crisis? First, understand this. Inflation is not an accident. It's a policy. It's the silent tax that's broken empires for 2,000 years. Second, remember that real wealth isn't found in paper or digits. It's in assets that hold value when money doesn't. Land, skills, productive businesses, and real resources. Third, never assume stability is permanent. Romans in the first century would have laughed if you told them their coins would one day be worthless. Germans in 1913 would have scoffed at the idea of wheelbarrows full of cash. Zimbabweans in the 1980s thought independence meant prosperity. Yet every one of them saw the same story unfold. The fall of Rome reminds us that financial systems don't collapse overnight. They crumble slowly and then suddenly. When money stops being real, society itself begins to unravel. Contracts fail, trade breaks down, armies dissolve, governments lose legitimacy. The barbarians at the gates might finish the job, but the real killer is always inside the treasury. And here's the punchline. History doesn't repeat, but if you don't understand it, it will crush you all the same. The Roman currency crisis wasn't just about bad emperors or greedy elites. It was about the fragility of money itself when it's abused by power, and that fragility has never gone away. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe, because history still has all the answers.